Well, good evening, everybody. This is Jay Klodek. Thought it was fine time to give an update on where I'm at with my 1/350th scale Enterprise. Some of you have been asking, and well, I know I've been taking a while to get this done, but when you work a full-time job, which eats up a lot of your modeling hours, it does take a little longer. Plus also the fact I'm trying to get this done for IPMS Nationals. IPMS stands for International Plastic Modeler Society. The Nationals take place in Colorado Springs, which is, for me, one state away. And if I can get this thing built to possibly get an award, even better. So this is not a project I feel like rushing. But at the same time, too, I want to tell you about some of the things that I've done to this model since last time. As you can see, I've got the sub-assemblies painted. The color I'm using is Tamiya XF12 Japanese Navy Gray, which has a little bit of a greenish tint. I have mixed some white into it. This is very similar to the color I used on my Doomsday Machine Constellation. I've also done a bit of weathering. One of the things you'll probably notice in the views is that the paint job on the parts is a little glossy. Reason being is after I got the paint down, I sprayed all the sub-assemblies with Tamiya spray can semi-gloss, which in combination with the acrylic, which I airbrushed on, gave it a very, very nice smooth glossy sheen. This is in preparation to put the decals on. There's still a little bit of airbrush weathering I want to get done before I actually get to that step, so after I put some of the streaks on, I'll go ahead and re-gloss some of the sub-assemblies. So let's talk for a little bit about the saucer weathering. Well, I did seriously think long and hard about possibly using the weathering decals that Polar Lights provided, but ultimately I came to the decision that I wanted to maybe go for a little bit subtler effect and also offer me the chance to do something a little bit more freeform. So I've been doing airbrush weathering instead. After I put down my base coat, I decided to experiment with mixing clear tints with my pre-mixed base shade. And for the purposes of this, I've been using Gunzi Sangyo Clear Yellow and Tamiya X23 Clear Blue. The Clear Yellow I decided to utilize to do that so-called rust ring on the front of the saucer. And the reason why I went with a yellow tint is because the coloring of the hull coloring that I'm using is got a little bit of a bluish greenish tint into that, and I wanted the yellow to kind of counteract that somewhat and maybe bring out a little more of a green brown shade. The result, maybe it's a little too yellow, but I think in combination with pastel chalk weathering of some brown on the edges, which I plan to do after the decals are down, I think it's going to work out okay. Although I am going to try a little experiment, see if I can mix a little clear orange and smoke tint to come up with something that's a slight brown shade. Reason being is there is no clear brown that I know of, and smoke tint is already got a little bit of a brownish shade, but I think I need the clear orange to kind of make it ever so slightly more brown. But I got to be very careful and only do it with a very subtle effect, because if I go a little too far, it's going to look a little too checkerboardy, and I'm trying to achieve a very, very subtle look. After I did that, I decided to do, I like the effect of the yellow, even though it may not be quite the same color, although I think I can work with it. After that, I decided to take some of my hull color and mix it with clear blue in order to do some of these blue streaks that we've been seeing on research photos of the studio model. For instance, this is an image I downloaded from the web. It's the saucer as it looked when it was uncrated before Ed Mirecki did his touch-up restoration. And even though they kind of over-weathered the rest of the ship, the top of the saucer basically stayed the same as it was since the series was on. Granted, some of what we are seeing is probably some artifacts from 2 decades of weathering even before they did the restoration, and granted, the model's probably got another 2 decades of weathering on top now. But there are some subtle blue streaks. Plus, I've been using the weathering decals as a template as well to put some of these streaks on. And in fact, I may use some of those decal streaks as well in some areas just to give a slightly different effect. But the majority of the streaks are probably going to be done with aqua blue pastel chalk weathering, and there's also some like slightly magenta streaks as well that the decal sheet indicates, and I'll do those with probably some lavender and magenta shaded pastel chalks. Apply them really fine, grind them up really fine, apply them with micro brushes as I did on my Millennium Falcon. I should be able to control just how intense the coloring is to make it really, really subtle. So subtle it may not appear in photos all that well, but in person it'll have the right look. But I did do some additional blue streaking on this side of the saucer. Some of it kind of matches the ring detail. I am going to take a very hard lead pencil and run it into the panel lines to give that appearance of a grid. And I do admit the grid might be still be a little over accented after all the paint and stuff, but I'm committed. I'm going for it. Because my model, I mean, it's not going to be a 100% exact studio model replica. It can't be, mainly because I'm going to have both the port and starboard sides finished up. But it'll be a nice compromise, and I think the looks when I'm done are going to be pretty good. Another thing I'll mention too is on the sides of the impulse deck, here and here, that's Tester's medium gray paint from the Model Master line. But one of the things I was experimenting with was utilizing some silver pencil, rub lightly over that fiberglass weave detail to kind of pop out some of that fiberglass appearance like you see when you sand over fiberglass tape and you see some of those strands peeking out with kind of that silvery white look. It'll work at a glance. I think once the dull coat is down, you may not see the sheen or the peek outs, but it'll at least give a little bit different color accent compared to the areas that don't have that detail. Moving on, let's talk about the warp nacelles. As you can see, I've got detail painting done on them as well, most of the way. The scallops on the bottom, I went ahead and used the color was not really pointed out on the instructions for the Polar Lights kit because they provide a set of decals for those. But I wanted to paint them on, and I utilized the Aztec dummy scallop masks, and I painted them on the bottom. Specifically, I used Tester's Model Master Hellbow, which is also the color that is recommended for the front of the warp pylon. The reason I went that way and not like a darker gray shade is because I've seen some models done with a darker gray shade, and I don't know, maybe the studio model may have been decorated with that darker shade, but in the pictures I've seen for the model as it kind of looked in late Season 1, early Season 2, I don't know if they accented it quite that much, so I went with a more subtle color. One thing I'll point out, by the way, Hellbow is very, very close to Tamiya XF12, except it's got more of a bluish tone to it rather than a green tone. Therefore, those of you that do not like that slightly greenish tone that XF12 has, you could probably take Hellbow and mix a little bit of white into it to get a very similar color, but with a slight more bluish shift to it. I'm going with XF12 because, well, I like the coloring. The slightly greenish shade that it has gives the model a little more color, and once I've got all the markings down, it should produce a really, really nice appearance. Although I do admit, when there's nothing really to break up the surface appearance, it does look a little strange. But coloring looks okay. These grid patterns on the inside of the warp nacelles. I'm not going for a lighted effect there, so I decided not to use the photo etch. Instead, I'm using the stock kit parts, and it calls for using silver on the inside of that, and then these little interior accents are done in medium gray. Rather than just doing them plain silver, though, I went ahead and sprayed them medium gray. Then actually, I did them in a really dark German gray, and then I dry brushed silver over the top of them. And then I put a dark wash of Tamiya smoke to kind of pick out some of the areas where the silver kind of obliterated them. The effect, I admit, is not 100% completely uniform, but it does give a little bit of a hint of a weathering pattern there. I mean, you figure a starship like the Enterprise out in deep space for who knows how long, you're going to get some variation. Some areas where the wash was a little too extreme, I again used a silver tip pencil and ran over the edges to kind of even out the color scheme, and well, the effect looks pretty good. The photo etch grills I'm going to keep for if I ever do a lighted warp nacelle effect on the sides, because it'll be a lot easier to use the photo etch as a light blocker than it will be to try to get the clear parts to look like that. Let's see. One thing I'll point out as well, instructions don't really point out very well as to what color the balls are on the aft of the warp nacelles. They could be color. I decided to go with Tamiya flat white. I'm going to probably put a little bit of pastel weathering on the edges just to tone it down a little bit. And the medium gray shade, the tester's medium gray shade that they call for, initially it looks a little dark, but once it's blended together really nice, it does the job. Also, Tester's Model Master 2 Voodoo Gray is used for the accents on these intercooler reactor loops. And again, it's another one of those gray shades that's really, really subtle. It's almost like the same tone as the XF12 I used and even the Hellbow, but it's got no green or blue tone in it. It's just a nice, straight, cool blue. And you really don't even notice the color change unless you're looking right at it. Almost like an absence of color there. I like the effect. Thankfully, I was able to get a hold of a couple of bottles of Voodoo Gray. Testers discontinued it, and it's getting a little difficult to find that color. But I was able to pick up 2 bottles of it before my store ran out. So it airbrushed on really nice, and even though it's a gloss over the primer coat, it dried nice and quick. I'm very happy with it. Let's talk a little about the secondary hull and the display stand. Secondary hull, painted just like the primary hull and the warp nacelles, utilizing Tamiya XF12. Hellbow is done on the front of the dorsal strut. I've got the dorsal strut wired into the secondary hull, and this assembly is glued on solid. Now the thing is, I did paint these sub-assemblies separately before I attached them. If you do that, you may end up with a seam if you just leave them as is. But there's a really clever technique I learned from a friend of mine to effectively take care of the seam and not have to worry about pulling out a lot of filler, having to sand, and then having to repaint. All I did was I took microscale microcrystal clear, which is a white glue compound. I applied it into the 90-degree split recess with some micro brushes, making sure to put a nice little skin over that area. And in a couple areas it took a couple applications before I got a nice, even, tight surface. And the beauty of white glue or microcrystal clear is when it dries, you don't typically see any bubbles there. Once that was down, and I made sure to remove the excess with a little bit of water. Once it was down and firmly dry, then I just masked off the area that was XF12, And I just reapplied it over the top, and it blended in really nice, especially under the clear coat. So it looks like that secondary hull to dorsal pylon seam is blended really nice. In the front, I didn't quite do that. I didn't take the hell bow and do it, but the thing about it is where it sits under the saucer, there's enough of a shadow effect there to provide the look. Plus, also, you've got a color change from hell bow to the hull color, so it disguises it really nice. And I'm not going to worry about it any further. I'm probably going to do the same thing on the secondary hull pylons once I've got them fully glued. I'm not quite to that stage yet. However, things are wired. These pylons basically are on. I'm leaving them loose right now in case I have to wiggle the circuit board out and then back in. The vents on the pylons themselves, those are done with medium gray with a smoke tint, and then also a little bit of dry brushing over the top to give them a nice effect. They're maybe not 100% totally uniform, but they did the job. Again, I could have gone with the photo etch, but I decided to go with this effect because I figure that painted plastic can look just as good as photo etch if you do it right. Although I have loosely glued them in with microcrystal clear. Just a little drop is holding each of them in, so if it turns out I really don't like the effect and I want to go with photo etch, I can always pop these pieces out, flip them over, apply the photo etch to them, and do that. But masking, one thing I did do mask over the hole is I just got a wad of paper towel in the hole there just to keep any paint from getting inside and onto the circuit board. Very important, because sometimes if you get paint on a circuit board in a place where you're not supposed to have it, it can affect the cooling properties of the circuits. So last thing I want to do now is, with everything nice and sealed up inside the secondary hole, last thing I want to do is have a short. Other thing I'll point out, if you notice, I've got some quick release plugs wired onto the nacelle wiring. What these plugs are is they are what they call Futaba JST style plugs. These are specifically red plugs that you would see on a radio control car or an airplane to actually use to power up for a battery pack to power up a receiver or electronic circuitry. They clip on really nice, they hold in. I went ahead and soldered them to my shortened wiring harnesses. And don't worry, I did the circuit testing to make sure that I did not have any dropout on the nacelle boards. As you recall from a video or two ago, I was troubleshooting that problem. But I've taken care of that gremlin. And the beauty of it is once I slip these nacelle front ends, I can slip the warp nacelles onto the slots, glue them down, and then basically hook up the wiring harnesses just like so. Come on, there we go. Plug them in and shove all the wires back in there, and voila, have a nice wired nacelle with a quick release. The reason why I did it this way is in the unlikely event that these motors burn out, or say in the not too distant future somebody comes out with a little bit better lighting circuit that I might like, I can always just completely change out this for the new lighting circuit and not really compromise the integrity of the warp nacelle. And since I'll still have the quick release plug right here, as long as the new lighting circuit is powered with a 12-volt power supply, all I have to do is plug it in and it works. As far as the loudness of the motors, I did actually run a light test with this thing fully hooked up, and once I got the nacelle end cap at the clear dome applied, it muffles the sound really, really nice, where you just got a faint buzz. And once the model is all done, and I shoot some photos of it, you should be able to hear it or not hear much of it, and well, I think it'll work. I mean, I know some of you guys out there are playing around with deadening the sound of these, but believe me, once you put the front end on the nacelles and the back end. It does muffle them really nice. You can use some additional soundproofing to quiet them down even further. I still like the motorized effect. I think it produces an effect that's very, very close to what you see on the model itself. Oh, other thing I'll point out, I haven't done anything on the nacelle domes, on the inner domes, to mask off the pedals, but one thing I do like is the Aztec dummy set actually has some self-adhesive vinyl that you can put over these to use as instant light blockers. Just don't pull them off when the masks get pulled off. What I'm probably going to do with those is I probably will use them, and I'm going to paint the exterior silver with some Tamiya spray. You got to use a lacquer spray because enamel will stay tacky on vinyl. And as a result, they should look like the silver strips of whatever was used on the studio model. Now, admittedly, they should kind of taper out. Skinny taper here, back to a fat taper here, but I'm just going to go with the rectangular strips and not mess around with that, because I could go a little further, but I think this will work out pretty good. Let's talk a little bit about the display stand. I believe I mentioned it last time. I got this big hole drilled in. Reason being is I've got a rocker switch that I'm going to solder in line to the wiring harnesses that are going to go on the stand. So I'll be able to turn the model on and off just from one point source. I like going with the rocker switch rather than a push button because less of a chance for failure. Plus I can just reach over and just go like that. I've also got a little hole tapped here for the wiring harness that goes out to the adapter plug, which the 12-volt transformer plugs into. I did actually finally come up with some quick release connectors to snake up through this this rod here, which is very thick. I'm going with I believe it's 2mm size motor connectors like you use for brushless electric motors on RC airplanes. But the two plugs won't fit in side by side, so what I'm having to do is one plug, like for the red wire, going all the way up, and the plug will be in the secondary hull, and then the plug for the black wire will be in the display base, and that way I can pass an individual wire with a plug side by side and ram it through. Beauty of it is when it comes time to transport this model, I'll be able to maybe not take it completely off the stand, although I can do that, but I can at least pull it off enough that I'll be able to lay the stand support rod level. That way this model will not take up quite as much space in transport, because this stand makes the model very, very tall. But I've run test wirings with it going up through the stand, and it works. And next time you see this stand, it's going to be painted up like a planet. I'm probably going to paint it up like the reddish planet that you typically saw in the Star Trek credits during the first season. Suppose it would look a lot like the planet Gothos, which was kind of a brick red color with some white wispy clouds and stuff, and some darker areas for land masses. I really like how those colors looked on the old style artwork that they did for the episodes, not necessarily the newer style CGI effects that they did for the remastered series. So I got to consult my research photos and come up with something similar, but I think when you do a display stand, the display stand should complement the model really nice. And when I did my Doomsday Machine damage constellation, if you remember, I did the open maw of the Doomsday Machine, which showed everybody, yes, now you know what episode it's from. Now you know what the story is. And the planet complements the model real nice. Well, so that's essentially where I am right now. Made very good progress. Once I've wrapped up this video, I'm going to continue on with my weathering of the saucer hull. I got the bottom of the saucer to paint and weather, the secondary hull as well. Before I go, though, one thing I will point out, one little tidbit, is I've noticed a couple other modelers, I'm not saying who, having problems where the warp nacelles are maybe not going into the holes 100%. You got maybe about a 1/16 of an inch gap between the pylon and the secondary hull. Make sure you do your test fits before you glue everything together to make sure that the pylon assembly slides in clean before you put any wiring in. If it slides in clean without any wires, and you end up with a 1/16 of an inch gap between the pylon and the secondary hull after you put the wires in, that means only one thing. Not that mysteriously something is jamming up the works. It means you've probably got a wire or two trapped underneath the pylon peg. So you want to pull it out, straighten out the wiring harnesses, try to pull that kink out. Once you do that, your pylon should slide in smooth, and that even goes for the nacelles up here. So make sure you take care of that. In any event, that's all I've got for right now. Hopefully I've got about another week or two to get this done. I've got about a month that I have to get this done before I take it to Colorado, but I want to be done with plenty of time to spare. And once again, thank you for watching.